Greetings and welcome to the Joko, 2 hours earlier than usual. But that's because we have a special guest tonight that we're expecting shortly, who is on a book tour and a speaking tour right now, and who will be speaking during what would be our ordinary Joko time on Thursday. So we're getting started early to be able to facilitate her schedule because we think it's more than worthwhile, right, to hear that voice. I'm Brother Youssef, a member of the Joko, poet, professor of literature and composition, including creative writing, and a scholar of cultural studies with specific subject areas in Africana studies and media studies. I'm joined by my partner and comrade, Tasha, whose camera is not working right now.
Hopefully I am present. I just turned the camera on. Am I here?
You.
Oh,
now
okay.
There you are. Yes, and now we see you.
Okay. All right. Real good.
Yes. So we're waiting for Penny Hess, right? Author of Overturning the Culture of Violence, this being the 25th anniversary year of its publication. And until Penny joins us, we'll just chat.
And do what we always do, right? Yeah. Open with our invocation, the things that we always pull to the forefront in our convening on behalf of community, on behalf of humanity, on behalf of non-human beings. And of course, there's noise in the atmosphere.
Is that the school bells?
It sounds like it, but it's not. It's some other kind of alarm sounding thing. But there it is. Okay. Yeah. Here we are in the street. Responded, right?
Yeah.
And so it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. And we always acknowledge, the lineage of which to which we are personally attached, of which we are personally products, that give us so that we've landed in this space where we are grateful to have the consciousness and the inspiration and drive to contribute to the upliftment of humanity, to the upliftment and the redemption and empowerment of the African family of which we are a part, through our various sets and our specific sets of idiosyncrasies and talents and understandings and ways, right, that have been a direct inheritance of our foremothers and our forefathers and all of our parents, all of those who have contributed to our parenting and shaping as individuals. And we uplift and acknowledge our collective ancestors who have the names that we know, the names that we don't know, who have been a part of this resistance and victory and the creativity and ingenuity and all of the things that have gone into the successful um, uh, dismantling, the successful resistance to um, the oppressive regime that has been,
Mhm.
right? Regime is too small a word, but the oppressive structures that have been um, established and set up over these last few hundreds of years. And we acknowledge that, we've actually have the winning hand, despite what it may appear to be. When we look with depth, when we look at fully at the dynamics, we understand that as difficult as it can be to respond to the kinds of violences that have been
Mhm.
imposed on the African family and really all other human families in the names of this cultural, political, and economic system. Um, we have all the stuff that's needed to change the mind of the world so that we can live in a more equitable, a more peaceful, a healthier, a more balanced world, a more balanced society. And we understand and never lose sight that the work we do it in this Turtle Island, in this geography, we do at the hospitality of the ancestors of the First Nations people and of the First Nations people who are currently on this side of the veil and living in body and carrying forth their culture and their cultures and um, are, have not forgotten their sovereignty, have not uh, uh, been in any way interested in ceding their territories and contribute in a powerful way to the redemption of the earth. Okay, even if that is grandiose, it's really no less than that. It's really
It,
no
it,
less than
it really is no less than that.
that. And
This.
yes.
Actually, I think regime is the appropriate word. It is big enough, because that is what it has been, a regime of both the rulers and the rules by which they do so, uh, which are those structures, right? And that regime,
Hmm.
inserts itself into every aspect of society, right? The way in which the society, social relations, even interpersonal relations, right, are governed by these particular ideas, the structures of these ideas, and even some scholars will talk about structures of feeling, even, right, and
Hmm.
even ways in which we are encouraged to feel about things,
Yes.
or interpret our feelings in particular ways, right? And what to do
Yes.
with them. And we all suffer, mental and emotional stressors, diseases, because of it, right? Um, in large and small ways. So I think regime captures it perfectly, actually. Um, Try to use that language, certainly when talking about whatever presidential
Hmm.
group is in power, to not, you're not even thinking, you know uh, I'm trying to consciously reject this euphemism of the administration,
Yes.
though there's some accuracy, right, as they are administrating, right, but
Hmm.
it also, um it sanitizes, right,
Yes.
you know what they're doing, right, and that we live under a regime, um,
Mhm.
um, right, and not, you know, the though this is being seriously challenged in the moment in the United States.
Mhm.
You know, the United States self-characterization, the very liberal self-characterization as a nation of laws, not men.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
the inequalities are embedded in the law or in their execution, even, right? So, um, such that, you know, the democratic content of the democracy is faint. So anyway, I think regime was right on point, um, and part of a, you know, this singular expression of the regime that, at least has had hegemony in the West for,
Mhm.
about 100 years, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially after 1945.
Mhm.
But this, you know, this the regime of the West, really, even,
Mhm. Mhm.
over the last 200, you know, years, and, um,
Mhm.
right,
Mhm.
200 or
Mhm.
so years, 250
Mhm.
years, and I'm saying that, you know, the assault may have started, you know,
Yes.
600, 500 years ago,
Yes. Yes.
but, you know, they don't really get a sense of, I mean, you know,
Yes.
there's resistance the entire time, so maybe not
Yes.
until,
Yes.
and really, I guess not even, you know, really the 19th century, right? Because they, you know, what Wounded Knee is 19, or rather 1890, I think, right? That somebody might say that the quote unquote Indian Wars are it a
Mhm.
final number, right? Um,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
when is Hawaii, illegally brought into, you know,
Mhm.
U.S. governance around the same
Mhm.
time, 1880s, 1890s, right? Something like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And the same with the, you know what, Africa, right? It's the
Right.
1880s that
Right.
Africa's officially carved up, or these other places around the world officially carved up,
Mhm. Mhm.
without ever getting Ethiopia
Mhm.
fully. Um, so anyway, right, that
Yes.
regime, um, of the West, uh, whose leader has been the United States, this in, you know, this latest iteration. So anyway, yeah, a lot to say about a word, right? But I think that word was
Yeah.
actually, yeah.
And but as have reclaimed it after I kind of threw it out and you pulled it out of the trasher. Yeah, it's appropriate for all those reasons for that particular because it locates uh this particular mode, the vehicle, the vehicle
Mhm,
of oppression has been a particular kind of state apparatus, a
mhm,
particular kind of governance, and a particular the other thing I like about it actually is it causes us to see the kind of singularity, and a kind of common purpose among the international, the would-be rulers of the West,
mhm,
you know,
mhm,
through the state apparatus and governing apparatus as it's like evolved through these kinds of republican parliamentary, all these kinds of these forms, but they're all settled, and it's through these forms that, yeah, that this that the damage has been realized, has been executed, you know has been realized, and certainly, right, that which we are confronted with, figuring out how to deal with this particular kind of state apparatus, and find ourselves find ourselves victorious.
mhm.
You're right. Even
Yeah,
as considering and imagining and figuring out how to create other kinds of formations, ways of organizing
Mhm.
society that facilitate this just world. What does that need to look
Mhm.
like? Right? What does that need to look like? Um, but yeah, I mean, there's already, even while we haven't lost contact with our guest. I'm going to send an invite out directly to the email.
Mhm.
Hopefully,
Mhm.
you know, that will help.
Yes,
Um,
if I sent a text, and I'm
okay.
wondering, I don't think that because we know that Penny is on the West Coast where we are, right? So we're in
Uh-huh.
the same time zone. But I'm
Mhm.
wondering, she's now based in St. Louis. So even though she's in California, I hope she's not thinking in Central Time, in which 5 o'clock was 2 hours ago, right? So
Right.
I think we would have
Right.
heard from her though, also, and I didn't see an updated email or anything like that.
Okay.
Um,
Well, we'll
or maybe
see.
she's just looking at her time and won't be able to come on till 5:30 or something like that, right? Because she is on tour right now, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so
It
yeah,
is
but
what it
yeah, I think sending the email or the invite out again, could work,
helps.
along with the text I sent, um,
Yeah.
and and if something happens, we'll just replan. Um,
Yeah.
but I've got a feeling that that culture of violence that Penny is writing about that needs overturning is part of that. It is the regime that we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. That
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, these
Mm-hmm.
various forms that violence takes, as you were saying in our welcome, um, that has that creates the world we inhabit, this social world we inhabit. The
Mm-hmm.
the violence of settler colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
the violence of settler colonialism, the
Mm-hmm.
violence of enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and this particular iteration of enslavement and servitude, but those
Mm-hmm.
other kinds of violence, right? The violence on our bodies, but again,
Absolutely.
the violence on the planet, right? Um,
Yes. The violence on the mind, the
and that,
violence that through
yes,
the
yeah,
notions of through the notions of white supremacy, through the notions of uh what the notions of human beings being at some apex, all of this hierarchy
all the hierarchy stuff. Yes, yeah.
business, you know, the certainly,
Mhm.
as you alluded to earlier, um, the violence and the modes, the ways of feeling, the ways of thinking, the ways of and the way violences are um, embedded or embedded in those places, because this is right where we um, learn when and how and where it's acceptable to exercise violence,
Mhm.
and because there's what communities don't utilize what is recognizable as violence in one way or another,
Mhm.
but of course we have to go back and talk about what do we mean by violence. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
um but as we are looking at when and how it is culturally, again, culturally acceptable to exercise violence, and who has the authority, who has the right, the social right to
Mhm.
exercise violence and with whom, all of the
Mhm.
implications of power relations, all of the implications of, all of that is present. And,
Mhm.
also, there's also an underlying notion of the acceptability of violence at all, and that's
Mhm.
not, we are so embedded in in cultural assumptions, or we are so steeped in cultural assumptions, um, about the necessity of violence, about the inevitability of heightened expressions of violence and culture, in our day-to-day lives, and our, that to some extent it's not like imaginable that there could be a cultural orientation that actually is not so pro-violent, so steeped in that sensibility. um we haven't talked about, and there's all kinds of violences, we can talk about them all, some might feel like it's a stretch to talk about the psychological violence. I was listening to some psychologist the other day talk about, I think they're calling it self-worth theory,
Mhm.
and the statement that they made was that self-worth was the kind of like the central human social need, the the capacity to feel valuable, you know, um, to your group in the world, as a part, in the world as a part, just because here you are.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, there is a real problem with specific, with, a whole lot of folk walk with, if there's only a few folks in the society that can, enjoy, whose worth is legitimized, by the society, then the rest of us are dealing with uh, a violence of our nature, if we're going, as human beings, if we're, going to accept that, if we're going to accept our notions of our
Most
worth.
people, even just through a pop psychology lens, are generally accept the notion of mental and emotional abuse, right? Attacks on self-worth, attacks on self-esteem, right?
Yep.
At least, I mean, maybe this
Yep.
is part of what the manosphere and the those who say empathy is toxic are opposing, right? That that we should no longer be talking about mental and um, emotional abuse, but that is generally accepted, right? As
Hmm.
you can abuse someone, right, without ever touching them,
Hmm.
and and successfully sue somebody or etc. Right? So that there's a kind of a general acceptance of that now. Um,
Hmm.
but like most things in this society, only encouraged to be seen at the interpersonal level or within, well, just that, right? At an
Hmm.
interpersonal level, maybe at the level of the family, perhaps in within a relationship, within maybe in a workplace setting, right?
Hmm.
Um, but
Hmm.
not systems wide, right? Not
Hmm.
and even seeing
Yes.
how those sites,
Yes.
work together as a system, um,
Yes.
and that has to be naturalized also. So the notion of people not just knowing their place, but embracing their place, right? And
Yes.
this is one part of the tragedy that is expressed in Arundhati Roy's novel, The God of Small Things. The character for whom the novel is named, the character Velutha, whose name means white because he's ironically named because he's so black. It's his father, right, who turns him in, because
Mhm.
how dare, he has to know that he can't, do this, right? That this is he has reached beyond his station. Um, and the father is sincere, right? He's a
Mhm.
believer, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
uh, and that's required, right? We have to believe that we are unworthy, right?
Yes.
Um, and in some ways, so that's another particular type of violence, right? That
Mhm.
don't even you don't even feel the slight, so to speak, right? Or
Right. Right.
the the or what
Yeah.
that dissonance of what is this
Yes.
human, what
Yes.
makes their blood special, right? Or
Yes.
their genetic line special, that just
Yes.
becomes accepted, right? And we know we live
Mhm.
with that. That's part of that
Mhm.
is part of violence. Um,
Mhm.
the psychic violence that colonized people share, that enslaved people share, that
Mhm.
that the descendants of the serfs of Europe
Yeah.
still is still
Absolutely.
in there, right?
Absolutely.
And those who are continue to be royalist of one ilk or another.
Mhm.
Um, that kind of psychic violence, and
Mhm.
this violence, that scholars identify as epistemic violence, right?
Mhm.
Um, the knowledge violence.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, that also ranks those knowledge systems, right? And
Absolutely. Right.
ways of
Absolutely.
making knowledge and knowing, and which is all part of the projection, right, of the specialness of the so-called West, and
Absolutely.
the right, the inherent right somehow, right, or the
Yes.
judgment of history that
Mhm.
somehow this 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 concept, right, the West, right, this political cultural concept,
Mhm.
that has very little connection to actual geography
Mhm.
since
Mhm.
it's global, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and takes, everything becomes part of the West if the West
Yes.
needs it conceptually.
Yes.
That it somehow it is rightfully in charge, right? And this is what
Yes.
history was leading toward, and indeed
Yes.
what we're facing now, right? Or as the West
Yes.
as the grip of the West
Yes.
politically,
Mhm.
economically, right, is slipping away
Mhm.
to this notion of to the multipolar world,
Yes. Mhm.
um, uh, the plural polar world. Um, it's part of what is being clung to, with this sense of crisis that we see, right, with all the fears of white
Yes.
replacement, the
Yes.
fantasies, or maybe the phantasms of white
Mhm.
genocide,
Yes.
um, and
Carefully
so-called
stoked,
white
artfully stoked.
replacement
Yeah.
theory. Yeah, art.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Artfully stoked fears that are in, um artfully stoked fears. But,
Hmm.
it's so diabolical. It really is diabolical. That's, just a good word for it. Um, and, the way the the culture itself, also, always there's this struggle to struggle with the scientific, quote unquote, right? The
Hmm.
struggle with aligning with the notions of what can be shown, realistically, what can be shown, what can be connected legitimately, um, through some kind of empirical process, and all of those, in terms of the epistemic violence, the West struggle, the West's quote unquote struggle with itself, disproving its own, disproving these hierarchical structures, this proving, where this path has led to revelations, right? Of for instance, yeah, the pursuit of common knowledge and the collection of common knowledge is just that, common. It's not singular, it's not carried forth by single, individual white men of you know what I'm saying, of a certain class stature, and the way that myth is delivered, the way
Hmm.
that story, that myth is delivered, and the way that the belief structure is reproduced and projected, so that the Zuckerbergs, the Bezos, the what is it, Musk, the Musks, the Gates, of the world, the who was the other one, who Jobs, right? They are also, all of these things that are assigned uh, to them based on now their stature as accumulators, as wealth accumulators, as these business people, so therefore they are the smartest, therefore they are the, they're the most intelligent, they're the most, which is a what is the word, a desirable effect cross culturally, because I think that, that's what humans, are, um, the notion of being able to have insight, to be able to, the ability to have, the sight that keeps the group safe, that keeps the group, any of these kinds of things, right? Expands the powers and abilities of the group. These are the, the folks are uplifted, but all of that contained in the, the embodied by the, in the white male, and whether or not their actual paths fit the, fit the mythological construct, those things are assigned to them, so the notion also that these people are in this particular, you know myth construct, um are self-made, the concept of the self-made man, the self, the,
Right.
they made something from nothing, we
Right.
mirrored by the, mirrored in the, we came and there was nothing here and we built all of the, all of that kind of stuff, and absolutely, absolutely inaccurate, by any measure. And so, that what is it, what have we called it in our other conversations, what is it, the world of meaning, there, that's not the phrase, what is the phrase, the, from the study of symbolism, I think it's from semiotics,
Semiotic.
no, it's not that, it's the, is it the universe of meaning,
Well,
the,
the world of meaning. Yeah, it all works. If what if
okay,
that was the term we've used before. Are you maybe meaning that that phrase, the symbolic order?
it might be the symbolic order, but there was something, it involved meaning, but this is what all of that indicates, this is what that is speaking to, um the, yeah, the way in which everything is imbued uh with meaning, that we actually live in and operate through, behave according to, choose according to whatever our symbolic order, whatever symbolic order we're kind of, encased in. Um, and so, yeah, um, these upending the symbolic order according to, some of these things that can be disproven and have been disproven, um, through kind of these scientific mind processes. And um forgive me, I'm a little scattered, I'm a little spotty, but I think that all I'm really trying to say with that statement, or with that like last set of statements, is there's these fundamental assumptions are and have been disproven and are constantly disproven in all of in all of these ways, in all of these ways,
Yeah.
from European supremacy over all of the groups, between European exceptionalism, as the beacon of cultural light to to humanity, um at human uh dominance in the order of beings, and as the only communicative and creative and intelligent being, conscious being, all of these kinds of things upended. And so this reactionary order um, finds itself in war with reality, in war with realities, that we are free to embrace
Right.
and build upon.
Well, that's been the principal, and necessary myths, right, of capitalism, in particular, right, that makes it acceptable. And again, even that, I mean, this is what it is, right? That the work of the many becomes the work of the one, right, or the property of the one. Um, and the system of private property, and the fundamentally antisocial character of it. Even though the capitalists themselves are in society with each other in their competitions, friendly and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
But so this myth uh, that somehow they have produced the wealth,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the
Mm-hmm.
workers, the people who work the land, and even um, to even consider uh, their right to monopolize, right, the means of that production and the resources, right, and for those who work the land to also
Yes.
accept those terms, right?
Yes.
That, uh,
Yes.
you know, we work this land, but the
Mm-hmm.
land is someone else's, right? Or even that
Yes.
notion that the land can be owned by one
Yes.
family, one
Yes.
entity in some kind of way. So
Mm-hmm.
that myth of the individual genius,
Mm-hmm.
in its various iterations, through
Mm-hmm.
particularly the history of industrial capitalism
Mm-hmm.
into and the various it's all these various iterations, media capitalism, uh, you know, uh, et, et cetera, right? We're up to what finance capital, tech capital, all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so these signature individuals, right? The myth of the signature individual, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the ignoring of those social processes, right?
You're
Um,
right.
and of course, it's absolutely central to the American
Yes.
mythic narrative of
Yes.
the self-made person and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, the very open, pointed, um, consistent, pervasive,
Mm-hmm.
anti-socialist,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
anti-communist,
Mm-hmm.
anti-communal,
Yes.
anti-collective,
Yeah.
right,
Yes.
discourses of the United States, politics, social sciences, within the arts, which is not to
Mm-hmm.
say that those opposing ideas haven't been there.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly under suppression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, that violent suppression, the violence, the historical violence against the working classes in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
the, you know, um, the enslaved workers, the non-enslaved workers,
Mm-hmm.
certainly the how should I say, the co-opting, right, of
Mm-hmm.
the settler working class into this
Mm-hmm.
project of specialness,
Mm-hmm.
right, of the
Yes.
specialness of white and Western
Yes.
identity and
Yes.
in group,
Yes.
ness,
Yes.
um, which is its own kind of violence, right? That keeps
Mm-hmm.
workers and peasants split.
Mm-hmm.
The and yeah, this moment of reaction where that period of the 20th century in particular, although not to ignore the work of the 19th century, that brings us to 20th century, but that the crisis of capitalism, crisis of imperialism, that is that period from World War One through World War Two, with the Great Depression, the emergence of the Soviet Union and then other socialist states, the popularity of the socialist project and the liberation projects, the anti-colonial projects of that early 20th century leading into the mid 20th century. And this moment of the possibility for a more humane society, actually,
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
not that humane societies haven't existed, right, but
Mm-hmm.
after this disruption of the
Mm-hmm.
modern era, right,
Mm-hmm.
and in in the capitalist period,
Mm-hmm.
that the the programs of the New Deal, for example, right, that were
Mm-hmm.
necessary to save capitalism, needed socialist measures, right, to save
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, and
Mm-hmm.
partly because of the popularity of
Mm-hmm.
socialist solutions, right, and an
Mm-hmm.
organized working class that
Mm-hmm.
and a unionized working class,
Mm-hmm.
um, and likewise in other places around the world, right, that needed to be dismantled, smashed. So this, the religion of anti-communism, um, as I've heard it recently described, to break through that period from, say, the 30s into the 60s, maybe even to like 1980 through the 70s, where the welfare state, right, it emerges. Um, you do
Mm-hmm.
get the anti-colonial struggles and the anti-colonial victories, and many of them taking the socialist path, or at least the mixed economy path, not just straight laissez-faire capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
the investment in the public sector, right, not without contradictions, um, but the investment in the public sector in the 40s, or rather, um, well, certainly the 30s, but then also in the 40s, with the war economy, but
Mm-hmm.
into the 50s and 60s with these,
Mm-hmm.
various with things like the GI Bill,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Very subsidizings
Right.
of, yeah.
Um, the emergence of universal health care in various places in
Uh-huh.
the world, and all the
Uh-huh.
things that have been subsequent that
Yeah.
that the right has been reacting to
Yeah.
since the 19 well
Yeah.
here in the United States certainly since the 1960s. I would think
Mm-hmm.
in Australia about the same time, as their segregation laws begin to come down and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. The
Mm-hmm.
that moment that had to be crushed, right? Again,
Mm-hmm.
that so that we end up in this point, right, where there is no real, where fascist, just sort of open fascism, right? And I accept and agree that what developed as fascism in Europe and its satellites was already what those folks had been doing in the colonized world, right? The and now and now other Europeans are going to be colonized by Europe. So understanding that, but this moment of reaction, right, where even what structures of the democratic state, are being withered away. Whoops. Oh, there I'm back. The because there's no real opposition from the other corporate capitalist party, folks right now, are looking for a place to turn. And where do they have to turn? Well, actually, there are places to turn, right? There really are, but um, they're not mainstreamed. So people got to search them out.
Mm-hmm.
There are anti-capitalist alternatives. There
Mm-hmm.
are socialist
Yeah.
alternatives,
Yes.
and maybe there are those who feel like they can, I don't know, shame the Democratic Party into
Mm-hmm.
actually
Mm-hmm.
being something like an opposition party or a
Mm-hmm.
social
Okay.
democratic party or something.
Try that, and maybe so, and that
Maybe
that
so.
might very well be, with the popularity of Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez tour is responded to, then
Right.
there might be some little inch of space, created
Exactly.
for a social democratic idea. But in
That are
terms of,
really popular. I mean, the ideas themselves are
yes,
actually quite popular.
yes, they always have been. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So it's choices, not the least of which was Sanders' choice not to go ahead and carry forward the energy, but to kowtow to the Democratic Party after they undermined his first presidential bid, or his presidential bid, you know. And so he marked, and represented a, what is it, a capitulation. And so rather than drive forward a a new politic and drive forward and stand his ground, you know what I mean, and go ahead and not only his ground, because again, I don't want to fall into the um inaccuracy of individualizing, you know what I'm saying? But yes, in terms of him being the figure to bring it forward, and then all of the, not all, and then so much cohering to his presidential bid, and to that presidential bid from, folks are who are speaking about socialism, who are speaking about, and its real possibilities and its real realized. By real, I mean realized, proven. It's not really a question. It's not really a discussion. But I imagine that he has regrets about that choice. Um,
Perhaps.
you know, um, but
I
also
mean, he
what
could
this
do something like maybe try to help build the Working Families Party or something,
something
right? Take that
something like that.
energy to help
Yes,
build the Green Party.
yes,
You know,
yes. The
as
time is right.
particularly at this moment when really,
Time is right.
and again, the Republican Party is not the Republican Party that it was, even under Reagan,
Mm-hmm.
when this process was, really kind of fast tracked.
Mm-hmm.
But it just isn't that party anymore, right? They
Mm-hmm.
aren't even acting like that. So it really is kind of Republican in name and should be the MAGA party. It's something different.
Mm-hmm.
And this, and this is
Yeah.
the insight of former Republican, what do they
Right.
call them, national chair or
Yeah.
whatever that person is, Michael Steele, right? You know,
Right.
MSNBC contributor, or now has a regular show. That no, on the commentary that this last election cycle broke the Democratic Party, and
Mm-hmm.
his response was, yeah, it probably has, but Trump in particular said he broke the Republican Party
Republican
first,
Party.
right?
Right. Right.
This is not the Republican Party
Right.
name. All that to say, though, that this is, it feels like, well, the moment is ripe then, right?
Yeah.
If that's what, that party is, to make that break, to no longer be the independent from Vermont, but to
Right.
build another party, right? Parties have changed
Yes.
in the United States. Maybe it hasn't been since the 19th century, but there
Yes.
was, but
Uh-huh.
like it could happen again, and or that this could actually become a true multi-party system, right, where that becomes something meaningful,
And the
um,
piece is,
two-party winner take all type thing.
yeah, and even that it's an opportunity also to um to point the American population, to drive the American population in this time of fresh, raw questioning and examination. Everybody's mind is hot with the question, what's going on, to really, even drive home the that as a a concept, political alternatives, you know what I'm saying? To really um make some shifts in the mindset, that what, the people, you can have more than two parties, and they can all
Right.
be kind of integrated in decision making. And this is, and here it is, there it is. Don't, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
It's a absolutely great time to expose the falsehood. I wanted to
I don't
return.
want to lose this thought. Oh,
Okay.
um, that the other thing that those rallies can show is that politics can go beyond electoral politics. Right? There are other
Yes.
types of political actions that folks can take, and that the
Yeah.
the Tesla boycott, for example,
Yeah.
um, and even the showing up at just demonstrating right at the Tesla
Yeah.
um, facilities. There was something at SpaceX, I think, last week, right? A demonstration in Hawthorne. The
Okay.
that and the number of people showing up at the rallies is
Mhm.
demonstrating that, right? That
Yeah.
the people
Yeah.
see that they need to find ways to be political,
Yes.
that aren't
Yes.
only who's going to get elected next, right? Um,
Yes. And that should be articulated by the person with the mic that everybody
right.
is turned toward, who's everybody, who for whom all the faces are turned.
Mm-hmm.
Time to get that in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Civic engagement means so and so. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right.
You come
Yeah.
out of this passivity. You take control. There's all kind of messages that can be communicated other than just whatever, push the Democrats to do this or whatever
Right.
else.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Because if
Exactly.
they don't do that, then they won't have done anything. Then they won't. All of that will be for naught and be a uh uh what? Well, I'm not going to say all of that will be for naught. It won't necessarily be for naught because people's
No,
energy
because some,
questioning is, and that
yeah.
question is up. The minds are open. So there's a lot of conversations happening now. There's a lot of conversations
Right.
happening on
And
a lot of
again, and it isn't to completely reject electoral politics either. It's just that,
no,
that's only one part of a thing. And who's
right,
to know? I mean, there was that moment where, what, 9 years ago, 10 years
yeah,
ago, where people thought there's no way a man like Donald Trump could get elected. And it happened.
right, right.
So we could might be surprised by the sort of people that might end up getting elected in this moment, right?
Right.
Because it is
Yes.
so unstable.
Yes.
I mean, there is a possibility. We'll see, right? We'll see what dirty tricks the Democratic Party will get up to.
Yeah.
But there is a possibility that a socialist, and I think maybe an Iranian American socialist,
Uh-huh.
or at least somebody from that region based on his
Uh-huh.
name, will be
Uh-huh.
elected mayor of New York.
Uh-huh.
He's polling
Uh-huh.
very strong. I think he leads in the polls consistently.
Okay.
Right.
Uh-huh.
This
Yeah.
is the moment, right? That
Right.
these things might be able to
Right.
happen.
Right.
Now, and of course, you could go the other way in some places, right? Where, I mean, people often think of, or really kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Stereotype or have this notion, right, of liberal California.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I live in California,
Right.
and we know, and I mean, California that sent Richard Nixon to the White House and Ronald Reagan to the White
Right.
House,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
has the just numerically the largest number of Republicans in the country live in
Mm-hmm.
California, just as a group,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
California is the most populous state, so it's understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But they've had my entire early adulthood. They had the governor, the governor's house for what
Yeah.
from like 80 to almost 2000 or something like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
California was hellish in its own ways because of it, and the austerity
In all
policy.
the same ways, which is what I wanted to get to in terms of the context of
Mm-hmm.
violence that we started on, and perhaps we'll pick up next week as we continue a conversation about, well, who knows, if we're able to get Penny back and reschedule that, good. But
I'm sure
in
we
terms,
will.
yeah, in terms of the conversation uh, about culture and about, that we were having, about how how it supports or resists reproducing that reaction, the fundamental reactionary culture, the foundational reactionary culture, the authority of, well, let's start with the violence of the corporation, and the violence of the state, and what
Mm-hmm.
counts as recognizable violence, right? Which um, just still, at least on its face, because the culture hasn't been saturated with the notion, of empathy is the greatest weakness of the, what I'm saying? They haven't been able to, um, just kind of we're just hearing those peeps.
It
And
hasn't been promoted in those words, that
It's only been said once, right?
language.
It's been said once and
But
gets
it's
referred to every
been,
now and then.
it's been there in the discourse, just in different language, at least since the 70s, right?
Uh-huh.
These notions of, so for example, this notion of
Hmm.
personal responsibility, right? And personal
Yeah, let me
responsibility
just say
is
this
the
before
reason
you
to
go on.
cut stuff, right? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So that that's the language, and now they're just now it's this. Well, empathy is toxic, right? But that all that previous discourse leads to that. Yeah, but go.
Uh-huh. Primes the palate,
Yeah,
right?
yes,
To
exactly.
articulate that. Um and the way that expands and the different things that it relates to philosophically in I guess, and you can speak to this at some point, that they, all of uh the relations with Nietzschean philosophy and uh Hitler's Reich and whatnot, whether it's a misunderstanding or a selective application of that philosophy or not, the carryover and the notion that the superior man, you know
Right.
lives outside of morality, and that there is, and so it gets watered down to some kind of, out of context, and watered down to or simplified to this very usable tool, of usable tool that upholds the exercise of brutality, but yeah, that part in terms of um, what counts as violence. And as you were
Hmm.
talking about capitalism, socialism, or whatnot, impoverishment not recognized as a violence, right? And
Yeah.
as a
It's
violence, and
it's
as
an
a,
active verb, right? To
say it again,
impoverish. It's an active
yeah,
verb, to
as
impoverish.
to impoverish, exactly, exactly. And it is systematic, and it is chosen, it is not accidental, it is calculated, it and it is, it is part and parcel, of the predation. So the
Yeah,
poor
part and
don't,
parcel. Yeah.
part and parcel, the poor don't aren't just a what a naturally occurring or
Right.
self-producing feature of the landscape of the natural world. There is a systematic uh, production, a systematic um, uh, all I can think of is the word production of the state of impoverishment,
Yeah,
of
no,
the
that
lack of access.
production is actually, again, the appropriate word because it is produced, right?
Okay,
The poverty is,
um,
abundance is actually the real state of the world, right?
is the real state of yes is the
Yeah.
real state of the world
Abundance.
by any measure, by any measure. And even if it's at the even if we stop and think about, okay, because there's always the notion that capitalism is necessary to production, that's imbued with all kinds, also with this kind of what is it, linear trajectory toward the arc of history, not the arc of history, but the
Hmm.
the linear progression of history toward the
Yeah, yeah, that
the
whole
best
notion of
good.
progress, right?
That's that kind of notion. um but the idea that the thing about capitalism is that it outproduces, and now there's the kind of wealth that the world essentially scratched the dirt in in poverty before
Right,
capitalism was self-born and began
right.
to uh
Again, a
you know
myth you have to believe, right? You just have to
which you
accept it
have to believe,
premise. Right.
which is a thing you have to believe. David Graeber is great to read on that, in terms of the myths that are perpetuated
Right.
academically
Yeah.
about the origins of money economy and the notion of barter preceding market relations and exchange, and all this kind of, the kind of picture that's painted. But yes, the violence of impoverishment, which is uh, the fundamental cause of suffering and death. Suffering and death. You know,
on
so
and uh, appropriately on an industrial scale.
on an industrial scale, absolutely. And so the part of that, for so many other kinds of cultural reasons, but this one part of that cultural reason is the who has the authority to enact violence, what legitimate, for
Yeah,
whom, again, violence is legitimated, and
is
what violence
legitimated.
isn't really violence. You know what I'm saying? The real violence, the way the media, and I know we will dig into this, but the way media, as we've been saying, produces these common senses, these common knowledges of what is real, right? And the real violence is, essential. Moreover, what Black people do, to each other, and less provable, but believed
Or what
anyhow
black
to
people or others do to white people.
to other peoples, huh?
Or what black people or others do to white people.
In yes, on an interpersonal level, right?
Always on
This
an interpersonal
interpersonal
level.
context, that which the physical confrontation, and there's these ongoing, so a very myopic view of what
Well, what was
constitutes
his name?
violence.
The author recently we saw at what is it? The Village Well.
Mm-hmm,
I'm gonna mess
mm-hmm.
up his name. Alex. Uh,
We're gonna
he
find
just
it.
wrote the book Propaganda.
Go ahead and make your point. I'll find his name.
But that right, the as he talks about the reporting, the reportage on crime,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
the reliance on the anecdotal,
mm-hmm,
right, and the
mm-hmm.
anecdotal reporting of these incidents of crime, whatever the various, whatever the crime may be,
Mm-hmm.
that then makes it, or really sort of the anecdotal obscuring the larger, systemic forms of violence,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
perpetrators of that violence. Again,
Yes.
the example of theft being one of the most glaring,
Yes.
where there were and there are the ongoing reports of smash and grab, shoplifting, whatever, particularly during the
Yes.
pandemic.
Yes.
But no reporting ever, or very, very little,
Right.
never makes the front page that I can recall of wage theft, of the
Absolutely.
routine practice of
Yes.
corporations,
Yes.
businesses, to
Yes.
steal from their employees.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
Violations of every kind that are
violations of every kind
produced on an industrial scale.
are
Yes.
systemic, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and just thinking, and that also describes the way violence is often represented or mediated, um,
Yes.
anecdotally, and then
Yes.
these very particular, very particularly
Yes.
personal and interpersonal, or in which some victims are
Yes.
are more worthy of our
Yes.
consideration and sympathy and outrage than other
Yes.
victims.
Yes. And despite the recent uh popularity of recognizing the legitimacy of gender violence, recognizing that the way power relations perpetuate violence according to gender difference in various ways, right? To speak about it and to attempt to speak about it in a very broad way, a broad conceptual way, there is still that, that there is still the question is not resolved. You know what I'm saying? The question is not resolved. There's not some kind of, at all. And the like the current uh uh attempt to dismantle language in policy and in law that deals with the question, say, in sexual violence, um the issue of consent and the role of consent. And there's, so there's part of this pushback, or attempt to dismantle um, the recognition of female people as full citizens, and
Mm.
whose rights need, rights need uplifting and protecting and what have you. Um, there's, there is still that struggle. So just talking about the question of who are the legitimate victims, what does it actually mean to be a victim, and I say that without forgetting that the white woman, and I'm using both of those terms, the white woman um, being the uh, convenient, acceptable victim when when the excuse is needed.
When
For,
it's
yeah,
what's the word I'm looking for? Useful, right?
when it's useful.
Because it's be- because the
Mm,
woman, and again, depending on which woman and what jury and all that, right, and which police, um,
absolutely.
you know, I, the worthiness uh, varies, right?
Yeah,
Where class,
all
right,
of it.
varies,
Right,
choices women make,
right.
are can shade that, and here we are at a point, right? Yeah, here's that moment
Yeah.
that you're talking about where at least it has become a topic of conversation, at
Mm-hmm.
least, right?
Yeah.
And efforts, right,
Yeah.
to be aware of and
Mm-hmm.
even intervene in
Mm-hmm.
um, the kind, the structures and the
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
the socialization, right, that would make that okay, is
Mm-hmm.
again what's being reacted to,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that the unmarried woman deemed unworthy because she's unmarried,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
promiscuous. Can you move
Mm-hmm.
to your left a little bit? The
To my
sun is
left.
moved. Yes, the sun
Okay.
is moved, and it was all sun for a minute. So now you're
Okay.
blind. Okay.
Okay.
Um, and then the married woman, right? As folks were kind of in, I think it was in the 90s, coming out of Oregon, where a judge ruled that there is a such thing as marital rape.
Absolutely.
And this incensed, hard, sort of the hardcore retrograde sexist, right? Full on
Yes.
patriarchal,
Yes.
that my demands are all, this
Right.
is I'm the husband, right? And so
Right.
and
Absolutely.
what is and so here we are, right? There's open talk, um, um among this now energized sector. I mean, we heard all the crap, right after the election,
Right. Your
your
body, my
body, my
choice.
choice, and all
Right.
this, and um
Mm-hmm.
because not because that worthiness is always up for negotiation again,
Yes.
depending on those
Yeah.
who have deemed themselves the arbitrators, of that. But as
Absolutely.
I've said many times before to you, um, it is no longer 1925,
Right.
1955, 1855. This is
Yeah.
not the world, that this is not the world of Ronald Reagan, even.
Yeah. Even.
The
Right.
the the global South is on a different trajectory.
Yeah.
The balance, people just aren't going to go back the way they to the way it was and accept that.
Yeah.
The there are already cracks in the so-called trad wife movement, right? Um, women are like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is unsustainable, really,
Yeah.
right? Or in particular ways, right? And this kind of idealized, version of that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that people aren't, I don't want, it's weird, right? I don't want to be repeating the, sort of the Harris campaign slogan, but the fact
Hmm.
is we aren't going back, right? I mean, people are
Hmm.
not going to go back to whatever they think they're trying to get back to, whatever fantasy that was,
Yes.
without a
And it
fight.
was a fantasy. That's the whole thing. Yes. Right. Right.
And
And
that too.
I dare say, you know, I dare say that it is a losing battle. That is a
Yes.
losing battle as folk begin to and even um um the white identified women who are currently seeing these moves as favoring them and benefiting them, and you know
They
what I'm
voted
saying,
that
and
way anyway.
uh,
They voted that way anyway.
right, that voted that, that think that this is,
Mhm.
and there's plenty that are like, yes, women do not belong in positions of authority. This is, I'm saying, but this is, you know folks who have grown up in a world where um you don't actually have these kinds of the actual patriarch. You're not living patriarchal restriction, so you're
Right.
romanticizing patriarchy. But the other piece is all this stuff that's being that they are attempting to uh dismantle, you know what I'm saying. It's been rooted in some very good thinking. It's been rooted in some very careful thinking. It's been, you know what I'm saying, and um uh looking at some uh truths about power relations, and built on some truths about power relations, and in particular, yeah, the powerless are absolutely live at the whim of the powerful, and that this is problematic. So
It-
exist in every way, right, at the whim of those who are civically empowered, culturally empowered,
mhm,
symbolically empowered,
mhm.
right? And so yes, you think it's cute, you think trad is cute if you grew up in a world where you may even think that the right to bodily autonomy relative to abortion is cute, until you actually grow up in a world where you are living patriarchal living the patriarchal restrictions. And then we're like, oh, okay, like you said, there's been some holes in the trad wife boat, right, in the bottom of the trad wife ship. um and I've heard some of those commentaries, by folk who um we're, trying to do that. And, it comes back to some of those same simple places, So I'm sitting here and I have no freedom of movement. I am totally restricted. I'm totally dependent. This is the
Well, the
first
dependency is a key.
is
Yeah,
key. Yes.
and the economic dependency. I mean, that is a fundamental pillar, right? Foundational of patriarchal
Yes.
relations, social relations.
Yes. And of the powered disempowered dynamic in and of itself,
So
right?
I always remember this. We say the people have the power,
Yes.
right? And I just
Yes.
always remember one of my first instructors in college, with whom I'm still acquainted, uh, um, Carla.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always, I just remember her saying, the thing is, the people have the power. And in fact, she might have said the masses have the power, speaking like a good socialist, right? The masses have the power because the masses can actually change things when they are
Mm-hmm.
organized and move. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is, and the language to use, is that they don't have control, right? They don't have control of the levers to
Yes.
execute that power, right? And
Yes.
um,
Yes. Okay. So yes, power it's not power, it's not just raw, it's contained.
yeah, yeah,
Contained
it's
and
breaking that containment,
it's contained and
seizing control.
instrumentalized. So it's the question of who holds the instrument, right? And who
Yeah.
has access to the tool. Absolutely. And what folks are realizing on first that fundamental level in that particular context, talking about that trad wife context,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of talking about another group, um, uh, uh, women who are victims
Wait a
of.
minute. Wait a minute. Let me ask you this about the trad
Can I
wife
finish
before
my
you.
sentence?
Well, okay. I thought you were. I
Women,
thought we were at a little break there, but go ahead.
women who are victims of domestic violence can tell you these things about dependency and control, and right, women who are sitting in prison because they killed partners,
Mm-hmm.
right, and or right,
Mm-hmm.
what is it, or significantly injured partners who have they can tell you about what it means to be victimized and not be represented civically, to have no
Mm-hmm.
civic standing, no civic representation because of the cultural and legal legacies of of patriarchy being honored in domestic relationships and whatnot. There, what I'm saying? There are living witnesses. So it's not like this trad piece is some kind of, you know, uh uh recreation of something that has been eradicated or been, what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
These things are living. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Go ahead, please.
So I wanted to ask you, who can afford to be a trad wife?
Say that. Say that. Say that. Yes.
I mean, just
Yes.
fundamental. Who can afford to be a trad wife? I mean, how
Yes.
many households can have only one working person in it? And that is
Yeah.
to say, a person working outside the home,
Absolutely.
bringing in some sort of income.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
these trad couples
Yeah.
are farmers, everybody works on a farm, as far as I know.
Right.
But then again, who
Right.
can, which also might indicate, a certain kind of land ownership or something. I don't,
Yes.
even
Absolutely.
then, probably really owned by
Absolutely.
the bank. But
Yeah.
yeah, just who can
But
afford? And often when I see images of the so-called trad wife or
yeah.
this trad family notion, um,
Yeah.
they look, and I know part of this is the the presentation, the performance, the presentation, but they look
Yeah.
like like they're from a Hallmark movie type
Yeah.
thing. And everybody in these
Yes.
Hallmark movies seem to live, very like upper middle class lives almost. And they say all, they tend to be small town America settings, and so-called small town America. These are some of the most economically stressed, places in the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah, who can afford to be a trad wife? Just how many people realistically in this economy
Right.
can afford
To
that
not have
and
everybody.
can live that way? Yeah,
Mhm.
without deep economic anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also kind of interesting and just pointing to that superficiality and the superficiality of like the material dynamics in terms of what's really going on in a real material way, and the symbolism of it. One of the most popular trad wives, I understand, and I don't know her name, and because there's also this reality TV aspect of
Mhm.
trad wife phenomenon, right? One of her responses, and she's considered a trad wife, and she claims that she is into the whole discourse of loving to be at home and preparing food for her family and watching out for the needs, and I darn socks and I do that and the other. And she's also uh has responded to whatever the probably similarly shallow critiques can be, just kind of out of reaction. Well, how can you give up your career, because this person is also a high fashion model,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Which
I
is
believe
another.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yes, and I don't know her name, and I wouldn't call it
Yeah.
anyway because this isn't
Yeah,
personal. You know
exactly.
what I
And
mean?
actually, if it's the same person, she was one of the first stories I read. She was having difficulty, right?
Okay.
She wasn't
Okay.
turning her back on it, but she was admitting, well, this, it ain't as easy as it looks, sort of thing,
Not as
or
easy as it looks,
or
right?
at least,
Yeah.
I have conflicts and contradictions I have to deal with. Yeah, I do
Yes, but
recall.
her response to that particular kind of criticism and reaction was that that she still models and she still takes jobs and she still gigs and she still, what I'm saying, which speaks to, again, a class reality. You know what I'm saying? Because high fashion models that actually work aren't paid in pennies. You know what I'm
No,
saying?
no,
they have substantial income. You know what I'm saying?
especially if she's able to build her brand as the trad
Yes,
life model.
as well. You know what I'm saying? But I don't I think that before the I'm sure that, like, in addition to the brand, I'm, and I don't know that much about her brand. What I know is that she was a high fashion model
And I
before.
mean her brand as her, the model, right? The trad
Uh-huh.
life, the model.
Oh, I see. I see. Not her
Yeah.
model as not her brand as a trad wife as such, or
Well,
in
that yeah, that both of those,
exclusively that.
right? That
Yeah.
there's a all of that, sort of can feed um into each
Yeah.
other, right? And
Absolutely. And give a right, and even increase the whatever the marketability is the word
right, exactly. So
of her
again,
brand.
again
Right.
highlighting, that she isn't really representative.
Not representative of the
Um,
what are were the critiques and the problems with the model, with the patriarchal model. And it's not a male. Yeah, someone's got to take care of kids. Someone's got, what I'm saying? The question is not, do you take care of your kids? The question is not, is it uh more is it better to not eat processed foods and to prepare foods from scratch and all that? That's none of these things are a question. You know, the
Right.
question is, you know what I'm saying? It's ridiculous. The question is, uh, uh, uh it's a question of power relations, um, predation, exploitation. These are the things that make the power dynamic. It's about a problematic power dynamic,
Yep.
right? So it's not about
Always.
the what is it? The ornamentation of one or another family model or the look or the feel, you know, whatever. It's not about the ornamentation. It's about the power relations. And so, you know, let us not confuse the two. You know, there's nothing inherent about patriarchy that causes abuse of power, but this is what abuse of power looks like under, you know, in these particular institutions in a, you know what I'm saying? So, um that part, you know, that part. And as people realize that they're losing their you know, actually losing space and losing their power, um to move about freely, losing that autonomy in real ways, start experiencing this loss of autonomy, it'll get unpopular. You know, it'll get a little bit like, oh, maybe not that.
It never
But
actually
really,
became popular, right? I mean,
say that again.
even the notion of popularity, you know, could be, it might be an inflation, right? You know,
Right.
popular among
Absolutely.
whom, right? You know, all the
Right.
many
Exactly.
hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions of women
Yes.
live
So
in the
what is
United States.
uh,
What is really popular?
what is
And
really
when we know
popular?
most,
Right.
but the majority of the population, what is um makes what, I don't want to say the majority of the population. That would be wrong to say that the majority of the population lives, you know, at or near the so-called poverty line. But
Mm-hmm.
they, you know, they are part of the 99%. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, again, right? You know, this isn't. This just is a world in which, you know, most able-bodied adults work in some kind of way, or, you know, have to work, you know, need to bring in a couple of incomes into a household in some way or another, or even if it's just like, hey, you know, so you can take care of your own little things. You know, it's just the reality of the way most people in the United States have to live.
Right.
You know, again, what we were talking
Right.
about last week, it's, you know, these aren't the lives that we ordinarily see in our popular culture, television, the
Depicted.
streaming services, you know,
Right.
broadly speaking. Most
Right.
people are middle
No.
class. And even in a TV show like Married with Children, where they were a middle class family, but there was always, you know, the character Al is always, you know, you guys are spending more money than we have, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, they're living comfortably, right? They, you know, they,
Right.
in their split
They're not
level house,
worried about
whatever,
how to
right?
pay the bills. They're not choosing
Right,
between groceries and medication.
right,
There's
right.
they can absorb issues. Yeah.
Like so many people do in the United States, right?
Yes.
The Who live, you know, in desperation in these cities, and in worse conditions often. It just isn't covered in the rural areas of the United States,
You don't even
as
see.
people have been saying. This current bill that
Yes.
has been barbarous,
Lord of mercy.
and again, barbarous is probably the wrong word to use, because
Right.
it's more like what patricians do. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that is, you know, that is making cuts everywhere, making people's, you know, it's going to objectively make people's lives worse. So many
Right.
people,
Right.
especially in the so-called red states, which are so
Yeah.
rural, where people
Yes.
are going to be suffering, right? And we don't get to see. We are at 135 though. We are only really meant to go an hour, maybe a little more.
Yeah. And so,
Um,
yes.
so we can go ahead and, you know, yeah, clearly there was some miscommunication with Penny.
Mm-hmm.
We were confirmed for 5 Pacific time, but maybe we
Mm-hmm.
got our time zones mixed up, or just something happened with her event, which should now be, she should be now in her event. I think it was scheduled for 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if we can reschedule with her.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, we will be back again, and we'll either be picking up with our conversation on culture and this reactionary moment, and some of the things we might expect to see. And actually, so I'm going to take this one little detour before we wrap up on that question of culture. I brought up the Hallmark channel, right? And
Yes.
the various Hallmark channels. I guess you can Hallmark stream, probably, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's Hallmark, right?
Yes.
Soft focus. You think the Hallmark, kind of Americana, right, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been wondering lately, right, and it is certainly that family television, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm wondering about or how long before Hallmark may come under some fire from the current reactionaries. They have been um, advertising some new, Hallmark movies coming up that are, um, how should I say, multicultural,
Mm-hmm.
and even characters that are clearly going to be in interracial romantic relationships, and considering the political moment, it's like, oh, Hallmark, really?
Right. Right. Thought of as a bastion, right?
Right?
Of reactionary values and reactionary uh uh cultural
Well,
representations.
right, sort of the cultural conservatism, right? And
Yes, at
um,
least conservatism,
the,
right.
the, the
Not yeah,
family sort of
conservatism. Yeah.
thing, right? And um, yeah, just that. Almost, I want to say, the Norman Rockwell version of America, or
Yes,
whatever. And I don't even know if
right.
that's fair to Norman Rockwell, really.
Rockwell.
But that idea, right? And
Yeah,
um, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting, and uh,
yeah.
an interesting. But then they also have, just like they have, their card division, the mahogany division, right, for the black market, and they
Right,
have their mahogany films,
right.
also. But within those films, there's always, the little towns are always multicultural,
Yes,
and the
yes,
people in them, right? Whether they might be farmers, I mean, people live, again, these comfortable middle class lives, middle class to affluent lives, and a lot of small business owners. It's the
right.
American dream,
We're
right?
still on Main Street, right? Or
We're
yeah,
still on Main Street. But
yeah.
and so my next question is, oh, are we going to see them? Are they going to, dare show a, same sex couple?
Right.
The direction they're going in this environment, I was actually
Yes.
a little surprised. Now, this is not an
Mhm.
endorsement of Hallmark movies. I mean, I myself personally don't watch them. Uh, when I watch, and I do watch the Hallmark channel, I ain't gonna lie, but when I do, I'm watching old detective or lawyer series, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What Diagnosis Murder and things like that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to me, right? There's smack dab in the middle of reform, and
Yes.
both, in the context of the United States, reform um, can abide or contain both liberalism, as it's understood in the United States, and
Right.
conservatism,
Social
right?
liberalism.
Social
Yeah.
liberalism, right? And
Yeah.
so I was just it also made me wonder if Disney owns Hallmark. Um,
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. But anyway, so
Yeah.
we can come, and also it's making me think about the other things we were going to talk about, um, what can we expect to see over this next year or by next year
Exactly.
in terms of cultural content,
Right. Right.
with the kinds of attacks on the attack on artistic content,
Yeah.
etc. But that's the next conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Before we
you
go, I do want to say one more thing that I wanted to
know,
say
hmm
a number of steps before, but it's small but impactful. In this discussion, when we're talking about this trad wife stuff and actual loss of autonomy and what it looks like, right? And the violence, the inherent violence in it. And I remember we were having a conversation uh probably about that specific thing. And I said something about, yeah, as we see domestic violence statistics rise or whatnot. And I may have said something about a rise in numbers of the domestic violence and murder of the female victim in a heterosexual relation, whatnot. But what you said was it's suicide. It's looking at the suicide rates rising. I don't know actually if in that conversation you were saying also or more so, right? But that part, you know, that which isn't understood as or typically looked at as a
right,
violent outcome, you know,
right,
and how
right.
that is definitely part of the story,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
not
And I
featured
think it's the
in
also,
exhibits.
right?
Huh?
And it's really the also.
It's the
Um,
also.
that, as we say, not what isn't looked at, right? That helps complete the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, I'd
That's
forgotten
what was
about that. Yeah,
in there.
that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is an
Mhm.
indicator. It just as it
Mhm.
was an indicator, right, with the passage of no fault divorce, how that suicide rate dropped.
Wow.
I mean that
Yeah.
that right.
Yeah.
So that suicide rate dropped when women had an option, um,
Yep. Yep.
when they're trying to take away.
Yep.
So there's a
Absolutely.
lot, right?
All
There's a
right.
lot to
Yeah.
talk about. Again, artistically, I mean, and it reminded me of The Handmaid's Tale.
Yep.
There's a new proposal to outlaw pornography,
Mhm. Right. Right.
which you know, I think would probably be kind of popular. Like, well, yeah, no,
Yeah.
but there's more. There's always more, and what counts as pornography, and there's so many things, right, that you suddenly don't have access to. For
Yeah.
example, you can get The Color Purple will be outlawed. For example, right,
Right.
and
Right.
so much more,
Right.
right,
Right.
that they are explicit about. Again, it's coming right out of the Project 2025 playbook, and they're very
Yeah.
clear about all the sort of things they consider pornography, The
Yeah.
Handmaid's Tale itself. And what puts me in the mind of it is in the chapter, and again, I'm talking about the novel, in the
Yeah.
chapter where she begins to discuss how, the sons of Jacob come to power, even though they're not named that at that point in the novel, but the Republic of Gilead, the said the first, sort of the first thing they went after were the porny carts or something, the mobile porny carts, and nobody cared because those were a nuisance, right? But that's how it works, right? So go
Exactly.
after the
Yes.
things that, oh well, no, who can object to that? And then
Right.
the next thing and the next thing, and who can
Yes.
object, um, and also because they're not meaning pornography, right? They have other things in mind besides that. What will that
Precisely.
mean to the arts, right?
It's a
So
exactly. It's about creating a tool of restriction of personal choice. It's about
yes,
restricting the citizens' autonomy, right? In the name
that's
of
right.
all kinds of things, but ultimately how many different ways the state can invade
Mhm.
autonomy, which is
Mhm.
the expression of power.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which is the expression of power. And there's not too much, you know what I'm saying, that can be legitimated, and all of the, kind of extreme arguments that are proposed and whatnot. It's like, oh, so are you gonna, I've had such conversations. Oh, so that's a slippery slope to justifying pedophilia. Are you gonna be in terms of same-sex marriage and all these kinds of things, and just all of these kinds of things. And we've heard it in group, as a matter of fact, when we had when Joko was more populous as a group, these kinds of notions and these kinds of arguments. And so this appeal to extremities, appeal to horror, and the invoking all of these ridiculous circumstances that are, as Baba would have said, universally recognized as ethically unacceptable, unacceptable behaviors, but
Right.
there's that always to create these moral panics,
To
and to
create
create
moral
these
panic.
panics
Exactly.
always in the name. I'm saying always. I realize I'm using overgeneralization terms, but so often in the name of protecting children. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Protecting, you know what I'm saying? This whole notion that, this trope that has been implanted, or this notion that's been implanted in this current conspiracy iteration, that Democrats are Satan worshiping child sacrificers, the child sacrifice and the child pornography and the child, and it's wild. It's really wild, particularly when you consider um how how many of those people, what do they say, uh when the Republican convention comes to town, grinder crashes or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
I
saying?
think,
All of
I
these
believe
kinds of
they said
things.
twice,
So,
crashed twice this last convention. That's within the same week, right? So,
man,
and not even a full week. So anyway,
it's not even
um,
a full week.
yeah,
So
that's
what are we
always the
what are we
excuse.
involved?
The part you protect the family, protect the children, and then pass bills that
Yeah,
undermine families and starve children. I mean,
and
the
starve children,
the production of scarcity in the midst of abundance, as it was described, and understanding all the contradictions of the U.S. aid program, right? Of the U.S., that particular agency, understanding all its contradictions
Right,
at this
right.
moment, right? Food is rotting in
Yes.
warehouses because they won't distribute it. They won't distribute it to the United poor people in the United States. They're just letting it rot
United
in
States.
warehouses,
What
right?
kind of
So
sense does that make? And where's the news
because
story?
they love the
Yes,
children so much and want to protect them so much they will let them
absolutely.
starve.
That they must keep a brain dead woman alive at the grief of her family, and compromise development of the fetus in
Yes,
order to incubate the fetus in the
for a
name
child
of,
that they will then
people
ignore
aren't.
once it's born and have got all
Oh
agency
yes,
to care for the child.
absolutely,
So yes,
absolutely.
this is the
And who's
hellscape.
paying for this? Who's paying for it? Who is paying for this
Well, that's why
incubation?
I keep
I'd like to
thinking
know.
that, is the family going to sue the state of Georgia for those expenses? Because I think they should. If this is an order of the
Oh
court,
yes,
now doesn't mean they might win, but
that's
who
right.
knows? But please, because it ain't going to be the
Yeah,
insurance company.
yeah.
So anyway, um,
This we do know. We've
that
done it
is,
at
I
6:50.
mean, I know we didn't have our guest, but we have been talking about that culture of violence, right? That she's writing about overturning.
Absolutely.
That has been the regime of the regime of violence, coming up on 250 years as a nation, a polity called the United States, 1,200 years of English settlement, 500 years of Spanish and Portuguese and French settlement,
French, other European settlement.
Dutch settlement, and not just here in Turtle Island, but
Absolutely.
the entire globe. And the entire globe is done. It's just the globe is done, right? It's it's that this is the process we're in now. That violence, that this culture of violence is being overturned. Processes are messy sometimes, and sometimes they're just so smooth. And anyway, we are now coming up. Yeah, so now we're about to be 2 hours at it. It feels weird to be finishing, and it's still light outside here, since we're like 2 hours ahead of our usual time.
Feels kind of good.
Yes.
Summertime. Yeah.
I will say I like our later time, but I got now I got time to do some other stuff tonight. So, but I do like our 7
Okay. So here we are.
So we can say
Absolutely.
good night,
Yep.
and we will welcome Penny
We can
Hess
say
back. But in the meantime, folks, let's just
forward.
you can find the book yourself. Overturning the Culture of Violence. By Penny Hess. Oh, did I spell it right? I did, but I'm going to do it again because I didn't spell everything right, or actually I didn't capitalize everything. And, that English teacher in me just can't let that go public. So I have to, without the proper capitalizations. And that is available. I think it might even be, well, I was going to say the Burning Spear Press, but I'm not sure now. So I'm going to look real quick. Or at least I know you can go to theburningspear.com. So I'll just put that up.
And my guess is that people can do this Google search.
Yeah, they can.
To find the book. It's not easy.
Yeah, you can.
Google this. Google
but
this.
you can go to burningspear.com and do a search there. And it'll come up. Because it is for purchase, right? I'm sure you can still get copies of Overturning the Culture of Violence, coming from a position of solidarity with indigenous and African people, the indigenous people of the world. So anyway, we will look to have Penny join us again at another time. Tasha, you have anything to add as we say?
Okay, so nothing. No, nothing to add. Wishing everybody fortitude, strength, and vision, continued creativity in be the world that you want and collect up with other people to be and build the world that we want. And we're winning. Don't
We're winning.
past the surface. Let us remember to look past the surface,
Yes.
and take heart. Let's take
Let's
heart.
organize. Let's organize for victory. Folks, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Sorry that we didn't have Penny after all, but again, we will have Penny join us at some point, right, to have the conversation. Please do all the things. Please like this video if you're watching it now or if you're watching it later. Please subscribe to our channel and please share. If you're on Facebook watching us, please do the same things. All the Facebook equivalents to that. And we will be back next Thursday. Ciao, y'all. Power to the people.